see the slide, everybody?
Got it.
Cool. I'll switch off here in a second. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about infrastructure as code today, and specifically why, well, a little bit of background about what it is, why it's useful, but really why should someone bother with this extra level of stuff really for, if you're just starting out, if you're not doing DevOps every day, if it isn't, your role to do infrastructure as code, why would you want to learn it somewhat and use it? So that's really what we're going to dive into, do a practical example of deploying a static site to S3 through infrastructure as code in what would probably take about 5 minutes, but probably take 10, actually talking through it. Something that if anybody's done it through the AWS console knows it's cumbersome and kind of a pain, and just seeing how that very basic thing, especially as a starting point, could be built upon. So really just want to do some intro stuff before we dive into that. So we are freeCodeCamp Nashville. We love to talk. We do multiple different things. I'm not going to dive into all of that, but I just wanted to share where you can find us. So we have a Discord server that we're on, and I'll put this slide back up at the end also. We're also on the NashDev Slack network in the channel freeCodeCamp. We're on Twitter at Nashville FCC, though I don't think we do anything on there. And also have a Facebook group. So if you're on Facebook, you can search freeCodeCamp Nashville and find our group there. But probably, I would say we are most active on the Discord, though the NashDev channel has its times when it gets really, really busy and then slows down, ups and downs. So yeah, the plan today is we want to do welcome, which we're doing right now. A little bit about what freeCodeCamp Nashville is, where it came from, and who we are, and then I always like to do intros. Then I'll speak some and go through the code along and do Q&A, any Q&A. And we also have a giveaway at the end. So we partner with JetBrains. They graciously sponsor us and give us a code for one of their professional pieces of software, which they mainly do IDEs, but also some other things that are useful to professional software developers. So those pieces of software there's a subscription, but they cost about $100+ per year for one of them. So it's awesome that we get one of those to give away. So talk a little bit about what freeCodeCamp is, and then I'll stop sharing for a minute so we can go around the virtual room and say hello. So yeah, freeCodeCamp Nashville is really just a group of people who are learning to code, or who even have been coding and are just getting back into different aspects of it. So freeCodeCamp, if you go to freecodecamp.org, is a 100% free online curriculum to learn to code, to go from zero to entry-level software developer. The curriculum is mainly full stack JavaScript, but covers all different types of things in probably more depth than you would need to start as a software developer. If you tried to go through the entire freeCodeCamp curriculum, even doing it full time, it'd probably take you a couple of years, and you'd probably come out as closer to a mid-level developer. So you can kind of really target what you want to do through that. And with that, myself and some other people a few years back were learning to code, teaching ourselves how to code, and we came across freeCodeCamp and kind of coalesced on that and stuck to that curriculum. And at the time, this was probably 4 years ago now, more than 4 years ago, close to 5 years ago, freeCodeCamp had a specific thing that they called Coffee and Code. And they were encouraging people who were learning online, teaching themselves through the curriculum, to meet in person in geographic locations, and to get to know the people around them who were also doing freeCodeCamp, so they could support each other and help each other and learn and grow and be there to bounce ideas off of and share struggles with and such. So we started having a monthly meetup, a monthly gathering through the Facebook group initially, and then moved it over to meetup.com, and have just been going ever since with that. So really, the original admin of the Facebook group dropped out and touched myself and Dave Harned, who's since stepped down from leadership here. As you know, all people I think don't stay in the same place forever, and we were most active, and we took off with it. And for going on, I guess 5 years, I think in October, it will be that we've been doing this meetup every month. We take times off here and there and have, you know, our issues. We haven't been every single month since then for 5 straight years, but consistently. So we're really here to talk about JavaScript and support the community in any way that we can. And yeah, we have very little true, like, I don't want to say structure, because we definitely have structure, but very little, I guess, you know, end goal that we're trying to fulfill. We just want to be helpful and a place to learn and grow people and help support the community and also connect people who are learning to code. Or lots of times we have people who we'll probably hear have been coding for a long time, but just want to get into web development or get into JavaScript, and freeCodeCamp is JavaScript, and a great place to learn it. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do. We have a regular meeting on Wednesdays and a regular meeting on Thursdays now, if I remember correctly. So, but really get plugged in. Everything's on Meetup or in the Discord if you're interested in other things. And yeah, so part of what we really think is important with freeCodeCamp is sharing who people are and connecting people to people in the learning. We know that code, especially learning to code, and especially right now, learning to code can feel very lonely. Your struggles can feel very isolated to just you. There's lots of imposter syndrome and feeling like you can't do it. And really meeting other people who are going through the same thing, even if at different levels, but seeing, you know, the struggles are not isolated to yourself is very welcome. So, okay, so let's dive into it. Get this screen shared back again. And I'll say, if you have any questions, please throw them into the chat. I have always done very poorly at keeping up with questions thrown into chat, but I promise I will get to them either during or at the end. No need to, quote unquote, hold for questions, especially in this format. Throw them in there so you don't forget them, and make sure that everything is taken care of at some point. So next, a touch about me. I've honestly heard people really don't care about this slide, but it seems like every tech talk has it, so I'll throw it in and be quick. I'm a husband and father of 5 under 8. Yes, the horror face there. One is not even born yet, so that's even crazier. But I've spent 10 years in hospitality in Nashville before making a career change. And with that career change, I first started teaching myself through the freeCodeCamp.org curriculum. And after about 2 years of doing that off and on, I got laid off from a position and decided to accelerate that transition and hold myself a little more accountable, and went through they changed the name of it, but I think it was called Online Web Developer Program that Flatiron School offered. So finished that a little over 3 years ago and made the career transition into tech. So been working in tech for a little over 3 years now. Currently, I'm a senior software development engineer at Evidence Care, based in Brentwood. So we are fully remote at this time, and we're very remote friendly before that. I think I went to the office once a week, and that was by choice, not by requirement. So I've bounced around. We're a startup in my responsibilities, but currently my responsibilities, oh, and I also wrote it down here in my notes because I wanted to make sure that my bosses would probably be happy if I said who Evidence Care is. Evidence Care is a decision support tool for providers that helps improve care and reduce costs in a way that's meaningful for patients, providers, payers, and healthcare institutions. So we're in the healthcare space. Our main, I guess, bread and butter is clinical decision support system, and we built one of those. But currently my responsibilities include infrastructure, orchestration, resiliency, CI/CD, the mono repo, which houses all of our front-end applications, and I also write React code because for the past 3 years, that's been the main thing that I've done. I've stuck in the front end in React, And as such, in a startup world, while I'm still growing and learning a lot, I'm most effective at writing React code, and I do it much more quickly than things like infrastructure as code, which I'm still actively learning every day. So what is infrastructure as code? So infrastructure as code is defined as operations as software. And I found this definition in a book that I have. The idea behind infrastructure as code, which I'm going to affectionately call IAC from here on out, because it's a lot of, the word is a pain to write and a pain to say over and over again, but is that you write and execute code to define, deploy, and destroy your infrastructure. So I put on the meetup group an optional question when you RSVP'd, do you have any cloud resources? So whether that is DigitalOcean, Heroku, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, etc. And about 50% of the people who RSVP'd, I'm not sure exactly who's here right now, said that they had some sort of cloud resources for themselves. So I know that I have stuff on Heroku, I have stuff on Vercel, I have stuff on AWS. I don't think I currently have any DigitalOcean droplets, but cloud resources, servers that I'm not actively managing myself. So really being able to create, update, and get rid of those types of things with code, as opposed to going into those UI consoles and clicking around and typing in there. So there are 5 broad IAC categories, and a detailed analysis of each of these categories is going to be outside of the scope of this meetup. However, I wanted to make sure they were at least mentioned. So we're going to spend time today in the last one. So some of those are ad hoc scripts, so bash scripts, shell scripts, things like that. Even Ruby, Python scripts, all different types of things. Configuration management tools, so you might have heard of some things like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, and SaltStack. Server templating tools, such as Docker, Packer, Vagrant. Orchestration tools, which in that realm is Kubernetes, Docker Swarm, AWS, ECS, although I was reading on the Kubernetes website just yesterday, 2 days ago, that Kubernetes does not define itself as an orchestration tool, which I thought was interesting, but kind of made sense in a meta way. And last thing, provisioning tools. So Terraform, AWS CloudFormation, OpenStack, and Pulumi. So I'm going to spend time today on that 5th one, provisioning tools. And specifically, we'll be looking at Pulumi, which where I was using Terraform up until about 6 weeks ago, and we recently rewrote all of our Terraform into Pulumi code for really one specific reason, and talk about that a little bit. So still, why should I use this? So this is something that I do professionally at work, and get paid to write some infrastructure as code. And I was thinking about it, and really, when we did Terraform, I never used Terraform personally, but Pulumi, I was like, I want to learn this thing. So I actually got sick one day and was like stuck in bed, but wasn't working. So I was isolated. My wife was like, you're not going to get any of the kids sick, so just stay in the room and close the door. And I was like, oh, I'll play on my computer. So I actually took all of my personal resources and, as a learning thing, put them into infrastructure as code. And I was like, wow, this is really useful in a way that I hadn't thought. So speed and safety is one reason. Honestly, doing all this stuff via the UI sucks. When you could write 10 lines of code and run a command and have everything done for you automatically is awesome. Documentation. So anybody who's played around with AWS for, maybe you did a few tutorials or something, if I said, hey, could you write down a list of every AWS resource that you currently have or have out there, sitting out there, you'd probably be like, no, don't know. Like, I know that I made some stuff, but especially in the consoles for things like AWS and Azure, it's like, well, Azure I think is a little bit better. They have like a everything page, but AWS, it's like impossible to really find everything that you have in their ecosystem. And luckily, lots of things are only pay per use. So if you have some pet project that nobody's using, you don't end up with a large bill because of it. But it's still kind of troublesome to think you have things out there that could cost you personal money that you don't even know exist anymore or have forgotten about. So version control, because we're writing code, we can use things like GitHub and Bitbucket and version control systems and use CI/CD to apply those changes and have pull requests to it and see who created what. Personally, I actually do PRs into a personal repo to manage my infrastructure now, and I can see when I changed it and how I changed it and what it was before. So if I want to say, oh, this was working a month ago and it's not now, what did it look like a month ago? You can go back and see those things, which is nice. Validation. So even without peer review, I meant to say without, not with, the tool will tell you if it'll break. So if you use something like Terraform or Pulumi, when you try and make those changes, it'll validate for you. So it'll say like, this is not going to work. This is not what you need to put here. And it can give you some intelligent pieces of what needs to go where. And lastly, reuse. So you can dry up lots of things. So if you had to make 50 S3 buckets, so let's say, that's a pain to do. But in something like Palumi, which you can write in JavaScript or TypeScript, and Terraform just came out with their cloud development kit, CDK. I can't remember what the C stands for. But you can, write a for loop and just pass in an array of variables and execute it. And now you have 50 S3 buckets and the code did all that work for you, which is awesome. And then lastly, happiness. So like I said, number one, doing this via the UI over and over and over again really is a pain. And so it's fun. I think as developers and engineers, we like coding, most of us. And that's why we want to do it. We want to solve problems. We don't want to spend time in consoles and UIs configuring things and doing that sort of stuff. We want to solve the problems. So I blew through that because I really just wanted to highlight some things, but I wanted to show it off. I think really getting to the nuts and bolts of seeing an example live is going to really help. And didn't want to get too bogged down in what it is and concepts and theories, but really wanted to show it happen in real life. So before I move into, I guess live coding, an S3 bucket static site that we'll have live, hopefully in 10 minutes. I practiced it last night and everything went well, but from every live coding presentation I've ever seen, when you actually do it live, something goes wrong. So we'll see if that holds true today. Let's see what's in the chat. Is ISE the same thing as infrastructure as a service? I don't believe it's the same thing as infrastructure as a service. I'm thinking about that. I don't know. Here's somebody else talking.
I didn't read the question carefully enough. Yeah, no, infrastructure as a service is different for sure.
What would you call infrastructure as a service? I'm trying to think of an example, and I can't off the top of my head. Like
just be like AWS, like EC2 instances or infrastructure as a service. Like that's the actual virtual instance, right? So infrastructure as code is more of your entire definition of your environment in one or more code files that can be, they're parameterized and they're reusable. And
yeah.
With a lot of these tools, you can feed them to any of the infrastructure as a service providers like AWS. You can write, like with Terraform, or I'm assuming Pulumi, you could define a lab environment, right, with a front end, a middle tier, and a back end, and it will take that. You could push that to any of the cloud providers without having to rewrite it to be specific to AWS or Azure or GCP.
Where does infrastructure as code fit in the continuous development pipeline?
So I think I can show an example of that. So let's get through the S3 bucket example, and then we can, I think, reason about where that would go after that. But don't forget that question and remind me, okay? Sound good?
Yes.
Because I think having some infrastructure as code written, and then we can talk about like, okay, where would this fit in? Because then it's a little bit more hands-on as opposed to conceptual. So going to walk through this example. And so I'm just in my terminal. I hope everybody can see this well enough. I always try and boost up the font size, but and this is also I'll throw the link out, but this is actually on Palumi's website. So Terraform versus Pulumi. Terraform is amazing. It actually supports way more stuff than Pulumi. Palumi's more newer on the scene, but we at at Evidence Care chose to switch to Pulumi specifically because we can write it in JavaScript, specifically TypeScript. Our VP of Engineering specifically mentioned a Turing complete language versus HCL, which is HashiCorp's language, and really the fact that it's much simpler and everybody understands it better because we're writing TypeScript all day long. We're full scratch JavaScript shop, as opposed to learning another language and the intricacies of that. It makes it just easier and less overhead as far as how do you even write this code properly, because you write TypeScript, we know TypeScript, so just writing it makes it simpler and easier to reason about. So just learning overhead is lower, which was really the main reason for doing it, and being able to do things that are a little bit drier that aren't achievable currently with Terraform. So yeah, so let's jump into it. I already have the AWS CLI installed and the Palumi CLI installed. They're both very straightforward to set up. And yeah, so apologies if you see the side of my head. The screen that I'm presenting is over here. But yeah, let's get into writing some infrastructure as code and running through this. So I'm gonna just create a directory, go into that directory, and then so this will just instantiate a new Palumi project in this folder, make it JavaScript, name it okay, and just hit enter for some defaults. And one thing that's cool about Palumi is it's just JavaScript packages, minus the CLI, which does some things. It's just JavaScript packages. So I will open this up. Oh, that's not going to do anything, or maybe it will. We'll see.
Might actually take a long time.
Yeah, I was like, oh, slash. Great. There we go. WebStorm is JetBrains' product. It does some cool stuff. It's really overkill for what we're doing today, but all right, index file. Okay, so this is just the default. It has some code in it, and we see we have a package JSON, package lock JSON, so standard JavaScript project with package JSON. Everything that we'll do today, we can do right here in this one file. So I'm going to bump it up some, and yeah. Since we don't have any compilation steps or anything, we're going to need to write, const Palumi equals required. But as far as things go, that's pretty low overhead in things. So I'm not going to dive too deep into, the Palumi API. All the options that you have. That's very, very well documented on their website, Palumi.com. But I'm going to kind of move quickly to get infrastructure set up. So let's say let's create an S3 bucket. So equals to install that in a second. Let's get some resources installed. So npm install AWS, and we'll also need MIME for the MIME type of the files. Cool. So those two things are installed. So let's file just like we would any other npm package. Okay, AWS dot S3 bucket. We'll just name that bucket. Let me see if I'm still sweet. I want to do this too. Okay. And here's also my AWS console, so we can see I don't have a bucket named that. Just these other things. I wanted to make sure that I was still logged in, and then site code, and what we want to do is take what we will have in a we'll make a folder called www, and we'll just put an index here. This file, amazing Emmet, which is awesome, but I can only ever remember typing exclamation point tab. I know it does so many cool things. Say from FreeCodeCamp. So we have an index.html file, and that's what we want to upload into our S3 bucket. And let's also take some standard node things that we have. So we'll want to read files. And that as well. So we'll write a loop that's going to read those files and then put them in the S3 bucket. And so require, not require, I think, and join create an AWS object. Here we see that we're going to reference the bucket that we're creating above. Finally, the content type. Cool.
What exactly are we looping through here?
So we're looping through this folder. So right now we have an index.html, but if we had a whole bunch of files, it would loop through this directory, this www directory. So it might, I guess, yeah. Is there an extra?
What's that loop doing? Spawning a new bucket for each folder in the
There
directory?
we go. So that loop is going to take this bucket that's being created right here, and it's creating S3 objects of each item and putting them in that bucket.
Okay.
So with Pulumi code, everything that you export will show up in your console as what, if you're familiar with Terraform, are called outputs. So we have this all set up. So let's see what we get. Say Palumi up. It's going to check infrastructure. Let's see. We got an error. It's not a function. Return valuable. File sync dot reader sync. Something's off here.
Where are we using item? Oh, where am I just going?
So the item comes into here. So bucket object has that requirement of a name argument. So the item index.html comes in as the name there. I think I've fixed this error. Nope. Oh, I never imported mine. Okay. Sweet. So we got a different error. We got an error saying we didn't configure the AWS region. So need to do that and do that. It's kind of funny because S3 buckets don't live in a region. We'll just set the region to US or the East. I think that's valid.
Well, they do live in a region, but it's kind of wonky how they work in the console.
Yeah, like you can't select a region, but yeah, they do live somewhere, but you can't like specify, or I don't know.
Yeah, but at create time you have to put it into a region. It's just it's weird. It's very weird. And I mean, the reason behind it is that it's based on durability of S3. So they actually AWS behind the scenes replicates it across AZs, and yeah. But you can actually put it into another region by using cross-region replication. So just fun facts.
Nice. Never knew that, but
yeah,
I guess
so
it
you
makes
can
sense.
create a bucket that's actually in another region, and then you can enable cross-region replication on the source bucket, and AWS will take care of moving the files and syncing the files. But yeah, it's just very weird. It's very weird in the console because it's technically a regional asset, but the console makes it seem like it's not, so they can show you all the buckets that you have. I don't know, it's bizarre, but yeah. I'll stop ranting now.
No, I love learning new things, and that was definitely new learning, which is awesome. Okay, so we've got all of our one config variable that was missing set up, and we see now that it's saying it's going to create three things. It's going to create what's called a Pulumi stack. So that is actually going to, since this is the first thing that we're creating, it's going to start keeping track of everything. So one thing that these tools do, these provisioning tools do, is they don't actually like scan. I mean, they can, but typically they don't scan all of AWS to see what's out there and then tell you if they're going to create something new. They are explicitly defined and backed by, I think Palumi and Terraform are just JSON files that keep track of all this stuff that they've done to your infrastructure. And that's how they know what's new, what's old, what to update, what to destroy, etc. So this is saying it's going to create three things. You want to perform this update? I'm going to say yes. Details will show all of the things that are about to happen. with that code. It's going to do all of this, but I'll hit yes. We'll say updating. These won't take too long. Certain resources take a long time to create, but these shouldn't. They should, 9 seconds. And if we go in the console here and refresh, I guess I could click that refresh. We'll see that this bucket is here now, and it has a little hash on the end. So I could reuse FCC IAC demo with another piece of Pulumi code, and very low likelihood that they'd have a clash in names. I'm honestly not sure if it's intelligent enough to check, but we see the index.html is here as well.
Well, it's probably created.
So,
it's probably created through CloudFormation, right? I imagine that's what they're using. Palumi.
Pulumi code like a framework?
So it's a package. So yeah, and if you go to docs and API reference, I highly recommend if you want to dive into Palumi. There's also Terraform and others, and many ways of doing this, but Palumi is the one that I'm currently most familiar with. Architecture and concepts is a great place to start. Spend the hour reading through this section. I'm actually in the Palumi Slack, and just because I've read this section, I've answered probably 25 people's questions. And I'm not a Palumi master. It's just reading the docs, spending that time to get familiar with this information that's already out there. But yeah, go in here and you find the piece, and we see this is where I was saying I wasn't going to dive too deep into this, but we go to S3 and we created a bucket, and it'll tell you exactly what's needed for the bucket.
And then you can. So is it just a JavaScript package, or does it build on?
So Palumi has a TypeScript/JavaScript package, a Python package, a Go package, and a C# package. Okay, so we've got our bucket with our object in there, and to move forward to our last piece, and we also see here bucket name. So we said export the bucket name here, and we see that comes as an output. And we also want to we want to serve this, so make it a static site. So a little bit more work here should get that done. So one thing that we have to do with our bucket is we have to tell it, that it's not just going to be a bucket, a standard S3 bucket. So website on here, tell it that index document is going to be index.html. And then we'll have to put a policy on this bucket, a read policy on this bucket. So same thing that you'd have to do through the UI. If we looked bucket, permissions, there's a bucket policy. Right now there's nothing. So essentially we're going to do this in code. And I think we can, I guess just to show that this is just, we could do any through JavaScript. We'll make a function for this, and then that function, we could put it in a module and reuse it over and over again very simply. I actually have this. Just going to copy this. It's essentially just going to return a stringified JSON value. But we can pipe in variables, which is awesome. So we take the bucket name, and we're going to get that from this site bucket that we created. So if we wanted to create 50 of them, we could create 50 buckets. We could do this new AWS command in a loop, and pass in an array of strings, and then we could make it all programmatic like we're used to doing with our other code that we write all the time. And then here we need to actually put that policy on the bucket. Capital B. Policy. I'll just call it policy. And then we'll give it some arguments. What bucket does this go to? That's our bucket. We just call the bucket variable. And then which policy? We'll say bucket. Then we will apply that will change the policy on there, and then we'll want to get URL, or static URL. Cool. This should now create our static site. Let's see what Pulumi tells us. So we see we get the details that this bucket is now changing. It's being updated. So it's not creating anything new, but it is creating a new policy. And if we look at the details there, we see how the bucket is changing. It's adding this website index document and the things that are changing. So let's say yes to this update. Cool. And we see we have this website URL. So if we go to this website URL, we should see this hello from freeCodeCamp. Let's see if we do. We do. So we have our static site up. If we come back here, jump back over to permissions, we see that JSON, stringified JSON is now there. We go to the bucket, we see that it has changed, and now it should say, yep, has our big public warning on it. And our static site is up that we wrote in code here. And for anybody who's done some tutorials and things that have walked through AWS stuff, we've probably done something similar to getting a static site up and running, and then next steps would be putting CloudFront in front of it and things like that. And really, the biggest thing that clicked to me is one, changing these things is very simple. But two, being programmatic, or multiple things. Changing them is very simple. I had recently had a certificate that was expiring, and I needed to change some stuff. And I was able to add a record to Cloudflare and change that record and do that all in some code and push it up. And the new certificate was validated. But really, the biggest thing that I think is for me personally, and like using this for personal projects, is that I can do a tutorial and build all this stuff and put it up there and say, okay, that was cool. I learned how it all works together. But then I can also, just as simply clean up after myself. So I don't know if you've ever tried to go through and delete a bunch of stuff in AWS in their UI, but a lot of it has dependencies that you have to find where like the beginning starts. Like you can't delete this thing until this, because this thing depends on it. You can't delete this thing because this thing depends on it, and over and over and over again. And I've done that more than my fair share of times. Learn a lot about where things are interconnected, but also like, wow, this is such a pain. So we can pull all this stuff down so simply. So right now, I'm going to do Palumi destroy. And it's saying like, it's about to delete all the stuff. I'm like, yes, get rid of it. And now it's getting rid of all this stuff that I just created with a couple keystrokes. It's all deleted. If we refresh this site, 404, no such bucket. If we go to console, bucket's gone. So everything that we just did is now gone. I don't have to worry about it hanging out. Randomly, some bot finding that S3 endpoint and just crushing it for some reason, and me ending up with a large bill. just kind of some of the random things that can happen when you have extraneous servers and resources sitting out there. Another cool thing for personal projects is you can choose this is a little bit more in the weeds, but where your backing, your what's called your state file lives. So I said how Pulumi creates this JSON file to keep track of everything. So that actually lives for free for a single person, and Pulumi has their console, so we can actually see in here a history of what's been happening. You see we created 3 things 10 minutes ago. We then added and changed things 4 minutes ago. A minute ago, we deleted 4 things. And then for every single one of your projects, you can create what Palumi calls stacks and separate them out and such. We can see there's currently no resources here. So if you want to see something like, here's my personal one. And I just call prod because that's the only thing that I have, but we can see all the stuff that I have sitting out there, which I don't think you can glean anything because these are all just names. But we see a whole bunch of Cloudflare records and some AWS stuff and such. So really being able to manage this and change this at will and see it. And this is all also in GitHub. I save it in GitHub, so that code is there in version controlled. And if I mess something up, I can go back and reapply it and do all those things. We see it has GitHub here. So going back to where this fits into CI, continuous delivery, continuous integration. So with my personal code, I have it hooked up to a GitHub repo and actually have it set up to apply itself on pull requests. So here's where I was doing that certificate renewal. But did not show. This was, I don't know if it squashes it down. Oh yeah, here. I was cleaning stuff up, but it'll show me like there's a bot and an integration where I'm seeing what's being changed. It's very straightforward here where it's, saying creating a new resource. It's a CNAME resource and here it is and the type and such. But I pushed up some changes in this repo, just code like we were just doing that define different infrastructure, opened a pull request. A bot took that pull request and said, here, this is what's going to change. And when I merge that pull request, it actually does those changes. So it runs that Palumi up command that I was just doing manually. And it essentially runs that command and says yes automatically and applies those changes. So that's where it fits into the broader ecosystem of things. So depending on how complex some things are, this could be a step in a build process where we actually co-locate our infrastructure code with our app code currently. So in our CI/CD process, there's a step where now it does infrastructure changes, then it does tests and builds and all the stuff that needs to happen. But something like this would be where these things would happen and how it would play into that. Does that make sense? Now that there's a little bit more meat on the bone of what it is and how it works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That makes.
You're welcome.
Some sense.
Yeah, there's still a very high learning curve of you have to know what all the cloud resources do and how they interact with each other. So you're not going to get around that. It's not going to solve like what is a VPC and what is ECS and what is ECR, and like you still have to have all the stuff that is required by a cloud provider. But especially things like DigitalOcean droplets, spinning those up and tearing them down and such, and keeping track of them, doing personal projects. And unfortunately, Palumi doesn't have a Heroku provider yet. I know they're working on it. I saw somewhere that there was like a 0.0 something version of one, so I think it's in the works, because I think that's where a lot of us end up putting stuff because we get free dynos, but they sit out there forever. I know that I probably have like 15 of them because they go to sleep and they don't cost anything. But I think I'd much rather know that I have 15 of them and also be able to get rid of them because I no longer need them than know that they're sitting there doing nothing for whatever reason. But it's just a way to be able to see it all. So
So infrastructure as code is like API calls to the cloud provider's services.
I can't say 100% how I know how they do it, but I'm pretty sure that they leverage the AWS APIs. So we could do all of this stuff with, AWS CLI commands, but it's going to be a lot bigger pain to do it. So if we could write some code and let a script do it for us, or a CLI do it for us, it makes it much easier. And then it's defined there and it's kept there. And then for visibility's sake what it is. So before I stop screen sharing, any other questions that would be helpful to have a screen and the stuff we've just looked at for?
Yeah, I have a quick question. In Pulumi, when you are updating your resources, does it tell you whether that resource is being just updated or if it's being replaced?
Yes. So we see here it says updated. I don't have an example of one that.
Does it tell you before you do it, like so that you don't accidentally replace it?
Yes. So when you do Palumi up from your CLI, there is a flag you can pass in that says like, just do it. Don't show me a preview, but it will always show a preview first and ask you to confirm explicitly yes, no, or you can look at details. So it'll always show you that. And if I remember correctly, there is one. So certain AWS and any cloud resources can't be updated, or because of the dependency on other things, they won't be updated in place. They'll be destroyed and recreated. So you shouldn't really see any true change. But that exact resource might not be edited. So for those things, it will show like a +/- where it's saying it's completely replacing that resource in the process. But typically anything that is nothing that is mission critical, like things like databases and things should be able to be edited in place most times. Things that have stuff in them.
You also mentioned that you work with Terraform before. Would you use this instead of Terraform, or how would you use this in conjunction with Terraform?
So this would be a replacement for Terraform. You could use them together, but it would be confusing in my opinion and difficult because they both are provisioning tools. So they're going to do the same, they fill the same gap. Like if you're using JavaScript or Python, they're both programming languages. Using both of them is good, but using both of them on like the same server code might be really difficult. So they're both going to keep track of infrastructure separately. They can't share that information. So you could use both of them, but I would just make sure that it's very clear which projects use what. Like I would at least make them project specific, which one is used for what. But there's also going to be definitely some mental overhead in the processes of how they're integrated. If they are integrated, into CI/CD, it'll be much different for the two of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I'm reading the chat now, so sorry if I'm silent. Cool. Just people asking questions, answering questions, connecting. It's awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. If I can find that wherever it is. Cool. Actually, I can find it somewhere. One of my web browsers. Where'd it go? Here. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to throw it back to this slide. That is the end of the extent of what I had prepared formally to speak on. I am going to spend a minute and type names into this random name picker for our giveaway, the JetBrains code. It's more difficult for sure in this setting, but one of the big things that freeCodeCamp and I personally feel for is networking people, because we write code for computers, and computers aren't the end result. There's always 90% of the time there's a user somewhere, or there's another person who's reading that code later. So we're writing code for humans in some way, shape, or form. I just went through a tutorial or an example of writing code to create infrastructure, which is just other computers. So my talking point of rewrite code for humans, I guess the fact that we were using infrastructure as code is to make it easier for humans. So holds true to an extent. But big thing is letting people connect. It's, like I said, much more difficult than when you have 20 people in a room and you can have those little, 3 or one-on-one or 3 or 4 person small groups going on after a meetup like this. So do want to leave space for anybody to, talk or ask any other questions or whatever, to more interact with each other than just me up here lecturing like, a professor, because that's not who I really am. I'd much rather be, everybody hanging out, more social. But I do want, that's why I wanted to put this slide back up, because really want people, of course, if you want to, but to get connected into the Discord and into the Slack and say, hey, and, I saw, people saying, would love to connect more and such, and really developing those connections and interacting. I think that one thing that is awesome about Nashville is the community is very supportive. There's very few people that see other developers as competition. I think we all see other developers as ways to get better, ways to grow, whether it's through mentorship or teaching or life experience or soft skills or whatever. I think we all know that the market is large enough and the demand is only going up as more and more things are dependent on software. And, it might not feel that way for those who are job searching. I know that. I've been there. I've been, especially entry level, you feel like every other junior dev is, while you're happy if they get a job, you're like, man, I wanted that job. I feel like the community is super supportive. So love continuing to give back to that as best as possible. I meant to throw on here, and I think I put it in my notes somewhere, but it's gone. Anybody who wants to help out with freeCodeCamp, we're always looking for speakers. We're always looking for ideas. We actually had somebody who had graduated NSS like 3 days prior to speaking. They spoke on CSS animations, and out of that talk, they landed their first job. So it's also a great place to get visibility and challenge yourself on things. I've never presented on infrastructure as code. I literally just started doing it less than 6 months ago, and felt that it was a great way to, challenge myself. Like, can I actually explain this, even though it kind of makes sense in my head? And so you don't have to know everything. Feel free to reach out directly or through one of these channels or through Meetup or something if you're interested, or if you want to volunteer and help out. Volunteering is really, really easy right now because we don't have to go anywhere. I'd love to, we really do try and target those who are doing freeCodeCamp's curriculum or teaching themselves or learning or more entry level. When we first started doing this, we know that Nash.js is in town. They've been around a long time. They're much larger, but they typically don't have as beginner friendly talks, which is fine. I still love them and go when I can, and have learned lots over time through them. But we like targeting beginners, and I'm realizing that I'm not just starting out anymore. So I'd love to bring along, or anybody who's interested in volunteering and helping out people who are really just starting and can speak better to that audience with support. So wanted to put that call out there. for anybody who might be interested, or if you just want to speak on really anything or have any requests. Without requests, kind of just go by the seat of our pants of what's interesting to us, and we present it and talk about it. And most people usually like it, but if there are any requests, send them in as well. With that, I'll let other people chat for a minute while I sit here in silence and type names into this thing before doing the giveaway. If anybody wants to talk, but I won't be able to talk and type. I'm just not that talented.